It started as a night like any other, music blasting, laughter echoing through the house, and a hired dancer set to entertain a crowd of young athletes. But by morning, the party at the Duke University lacrosse team's house would become infamous. A single accusation, shocking, polarizing, and deeply divisive, would ripple through the nation, leaving careers, reputations, and lives shattered in its wake. Crystal Mangum, a 27-year-old single mother, was one of two dancers hired to perform that night. She walked into the house with little more than her music, her heels, and a plan to make some extra cash. She likely never imagined that within hours, she would find herself at the center of one of the most explosive legal battles in modern American history. When the lights dimmed and the music faded, Mangum would make a claim that shook the room and soon the world. Three players, she alleged, had trapped her in a bathroom and committed an unspeakable act. The accusations weren't just devastating, they were incendiary. A predominantly white, privileged group of athletes accused by a black, working class woman set the stage for a cultural and legal storm no one was prepared for. But was everything as it seemed that night? From the very beginning, there were whispers of inconsistencies. The air was thick with tension, suspicion, and a question that would haunt everyone involved. Was this a cry for justice, or the beginning of a terrible miscarriage of it? The story that would unfold in the coming months would force the world to confront the fragile nature of truth and the devastating consequences of its distortion. And in this case, as the world was about to learn, truth would prove more elusive than anyone could have imagined. Stay with me as we unravel the events of that night, the fallout, and the questions that still linger over what really happened at 610 North Buchanan Boulevard. At first, Crystal Mangum's accusations sent shockwaves through Durham. The community, already fraught with divisions over race and class, braced itself for a trial that many believed would shine a light on systemic inequalities. But as investigators began peeling back the layers of her claims, cracks in the story began to appear. The first red flag came with the DNA evidence, or rather, the lack of it. Forensic testing found no trace of DNA from any of the three accused lacrosse players on Mangum's body or clothing. This was a devastating blow to the prosecution's case, as such evidence is often considered a cornerstone in sexual assault investigations. Instead, the DNA results pointed to other individuals, none of whom were connected to the team. Meanwhile, the defense team, led by skilled attorneys who refused to back down in the face of public pressure, began digging into the details. Their findings painted a troubling picture of the investigation's handling. From rushed photo lineups to key evidence being ignored, it became clear that the case was riddled with procedural missteps. One particularly damning discovery was the role of District Attorney Mike Nifong. As the prosecution's lead, Nifong was seen as a champion for Mangum, but his motives quickly came into question. With an election on the horizon, critics accused him of exploiting the case to secure votes. The defense revealed that he had withheld key DNA evidence that could exonerate the players, a revelation that would later lead to his disbarment and disgrace. And then there were Mangum's own statements. As investigators interviewed her repeatedly, inconsistencies in her account began to mount. Details of the alleged assault shifted, timelines changed, and elements of her story contradicted not only evidence but also earlier versions of her own testimony. Public opinion, once heavily weighted in Mangum's favor, began to shift. The media, which had initially championed her story as a symbol of systemic injustice, now grappled with the possibility that they had rushed to judgment. The accused players, meanwhile, endured intense scrutiny and public vilification. They were branded as privileged villains, their lives turned upside down as they were suspended from school and faced unrelenting media coverage. Yet they maintained their innocence, standing by their claim that nothing criminal had occurred that night. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, one thing became increasingly clear. This case was not what it had seemed, but was it a deliberate fabrication or something far more complicated? The legal battle that followed would expose deep flaws in the justice system, shake public faith, and leave behind a trail of questions that would linger long after the players were cleared of wrongdoing. The truth seemed to be slipping through everyone's fingers, and the fight for justice on all sides was only beginning. When the Duke Lacrosse case fell apart, it wasn't just the accused players who faced the fallout. Crystal Mangum, once viewed as a victim of racial and class based injustice, found herself thrust into an unforgiving spotlight. The public was no longer rallying behind her. Instead, she became a polarizing figure, caught between those who still believed her story and those who saw her as the architect of a damaging hoax. By 2008, Mangum attempted to reclaim her narrative with the publication of her memoir, The Last Dance for Grace. In it, she doubled down on her allegations, painting herself as a survivor whose voice had been drowned out by the power of privilege and wealth. The memoir, however, received a mixed reception. While some sympathized with her struggles, others saw it as a desperate attempt to remain relevant. But the book was only a brief respite in what was becoming an increasingly chaotic life. Legal troubles soon followed. Mangum had a pattern of volatile relationships, and in 2010, a domestic dispute led to her being charged with arson and child endangerment after setting her then boyfriend's clothes on fire. She narrowly avoided a harsher sentence, but was left with a criminal record that further clouded her public image. Her relationships with those closest to her also began to fray. Friends and family members, once supportive, distanced themselves as Mangum's behavior became more erratic. She struggled to maintain stable employment, and financial hardship loomed over her. In interviews and public statements, Mangum often pointed to her past as the root of her struggles. She painted herself as someone who had been failed by the system, both as a victim of alleged assault and as a woman vilified for seeking justice. But her critics saw something different, a woman who had irreparably damaged the lives of others while refusing to take accountability for her actions. The collapse of the case had far reaching consequences for Mangum, not just in her personal life, but in the public's perception of her. For some, she was a cautionary tale about the perils of false accusations. For others, she remained a tragic figure, a symbol of systemic failures and personal missteps. As Mangum tried to rebuild her life, one question lingered. Was she truly a victim of circumstance, or had her actions set her on this path? That question would take on new urgency as her life spiraled further into chaos, culminating in a crime far more devastating than the events of 2006. What followed would cement her place in the annals of true crime, not as an accuser, but as a convicted killer. By early 2011, Crystal Mangum was trying to piece her life back together. She had survived the storm of public scrutiny and was searching for stability. That search led her to Reginald Daye, a 46-year-old painter from Durham, North Carolina. To those who knew him, Daye was a hard-working and kind man, someone who valued family and community. To Mangum, he was a new chapter, a chance to rebuild and start fresh. Their relationship moved fast. Within months, Mangum and her children had moved into Day's apartment, blending their lives together. For Mangum, it seemed like a new beginning. Day opened his home and heart to her, and on the surface, the couple appeared to be building a future together. But not everyone saw this relationship as a positive change. Friends and family on both sides noticed cracks beneath the surface. While there were moments of love and warmth, there were also troubling signs. Heated arguments, erratic behavior, and emotional outbursts cast a shadow over their time together. Mangum's past loomed large in the minds of those close to her. Could she truly move forward, or was she destined to repeat the chaos that had followed her for years? As for Day, those who knew him wondered whether his compassionate nature had blinded him to the volatility of their relationship. The couple's life together was anything but smooth. There were reports of tension, jealousy, and unresolved conflicts bubbling just beneath the surface. Those around them began to fear that their arguments might escalate into something far more dangerous. And they were right. The story of Crystal Mangum and Reginald Daye was on a collision course, one that would end in tragedy. What began as a hopeful new start would soon unravel into a nightmare, one that neither would escape unscathed. What exactly happened behind closed doors in that apartment? And how did a relationship that seemed full of promise spiral so completely out of control? Those questions would haunt everyone involved as the events of April 2011 unfolded, leading to a crime that shocked an entire community. It was the early hours of April 3rd, 2011, when the quiet of Reginald Daye's Durham apartment was shattered by chaos. Neighbors would later recall hearing loud voices, the unmistakable sound of a heated argument. Inside, Crystal Mangum and Reginald Daye were caught in a conflict that would have devastating consequences. The argument, though intense, was not unusual for the couple. Their relationship had been marred by volatility, and disagreements often escalated quickly. But this night was different. As tempers flared, the confrontation took a violent turn. According to Mangum, she acted in self defense. She claimed that Day had become aggressive, threatening her during the argument. In fear for her life, she said, she grabbed a kitchen knife to protect herself. However, the stab wound she inflicted was severe, puncturing Day's lung and leaving him bleeding on the floor. Panicked, Mangum fled the apartment, leaving Day to call for help. Emergency responders arrived quickly, rushing Day to the hospital. For 10 days, doctors worked tirelessly to save him. Despite their efforts, he succumbed to his injuries on April 13th, a death that would change the trajectory of Mangum's life forever. Police arrested Mangum the same day Day passed away, charging her with second-degree murder. The once hopeful new chapter in her life had transformed into a nightmare. As she sat in custody, Mangum insisted on her innocence, repeating her claims of self-defense. But the evidence painted a more complicated picture. Investigators found that while Day had a history of arguments with Mangum, there was little to support her claims of immediate danger that night. Witnesses described the couple's relationship as turbulent, but had not seen clear signs of abuse. The prosecution argued that Mangum's actions were not defensive, but intentional, the culmination of a relationship fraught with tension and unresolved anger. The death of Reginald Daye left his family devastated. They described him as a kind, hard-working man who didn't deserve such a tragic end. For them, Mangum's claims of self-defense felt like a second betrayal, a refusal to accept responsibility for her actions. The fatal altercation not only ended Day's life, but also sealed Mangum's fate. Her arrest marked the beginning of a new legal battle, one that would bring her back into the public eye and force a community to grapple with difficult questions about justice, accountability, and the truth behind closed doors. As the case moved to trial, the nation watched once again. Would Mangum's claim of self defense hold up in court, or would her troubled past overshadow her present? The answers would come, but not without revealing the deep fractures in a story that was far from over. By November of 2013, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Crystal Mangum's trial began. This was no ordinary murder case. For many, it was a litmus test of justice, entangled with the shadows of Mangum's past and the tragic end of Reginald Daye. The prosecution wasted no time painting a grim picture of the events of April 3rd, 2011. They argued that the stabbing was not a split-second decision made in fear, but a calculated act of anger. Mangum, they claimed, had a history of volatility and impulsive behavior, and this act was no different. They described how Reginald Daye had been trying to end their relationship, a point they suggested could have triggered her rage. To bolster their case, the prosecution presented physical evidence. The knife, recovered from the scene, was displayed in court, a chilling reminder of the fatal altercation. Medical experts testified about the severity of Daye's wound, explaining that the force used was considerable, far more than what might be expected in an act of self-defense. But the defense wasn't about to let the jury forget who Crystal Mangum was, a woman they argued had endured a lifetime of hardships and trauma. They claimed that Daye had been abusive, that the argument on the night of the stabbing had turned violent, and that Mangum had feared for her life. The defense called witnesses who testified to seeing bruises on Mangum in the past, suggesting a pattern of aggression from Daye. The trial was a battle of narratives. On one side, the prosecution painted Mangum as an aggressor who brought chaos into Daye's life. On the other, the defense portrayed her as a woman who had been backed into a corner, fighting to protect herself in a relationship that had become dangerous. For the jury, the task was monumental. They had to sift through conflicting testimonies, weigh the evidence, and separate emotion from fact. The courtroom was heavy with the knowledge that their decision would not only determine Mangum's fate, but also shape the legacy of a relationship marked by tragedy. Outside the courthouse, the case reignited debates among the public. Was Crystal Mangum a victim of abuse and circumstance, or was this another chapter in a pattern of destructive behavior? The media dissected every detail, speculating on how the jury might lean and what the outcome would mean for Mangum's already infamous reputation. The trial carried an undercurrent of tension, as if everyone involved understood that this wasn't just about the night of April 3rd. It was about everything that had led to it, the scars of Mangum's past, the choices she had made, and the lives that had been forever altered in the aftermath. As closing arguments loomed, the question that hung in the air was simple yet impossible to answer. What truly happened behind closed doors that night, and who would pay the ultimate price for the truth? The jury's decision would soon bring clarity or deepen the mystery. The jury deliberated for days, sifting through hours of testimony and evidence before finally reaching a verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the decision was announced. Crystal Mangum was found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Reginald Daye. The weight of the words settled over the room, each syllable a stark reminder of a life lost and another forever changed. For the prosecution, the verdict was a vindication. They had argued that Mangum's actions were deliberate and unjustified, and the jury agreed. The court sentenced her to a term of 14 to 18 years in prison, a decision that drew both relief and controversy. Mangum's defense team expressed disappointment, maintaining that their client had acted in self defense. Outside the courthouse, public opinion was as divided as it had been throughout the trial. Some saw the verdict as long overdue accountability, a reckoning for a woman whose life had left a trail of destruction. Others argued that the justice system had failed to consider the full context of her troubled life and her allegations of abuse. The media reignited discussions about Mangum's past. Many viewed her controversial history, including her role in the Duke Lacrosse case, as a shadow that had hung over the trial. Did it influence the jury's perception of her? Could someone with such a polarizing history receive a fair trial? The sentencing was not the end of the story, but the beginning of another chapter, one that would see Mangum fighting to overturn her conviction while grappling with life behind bars. The question of justice lingered, haunting those who followed her story. Crystal Mangum entered the North Carolina Correctional Institution for women, carrying the weight of her conviction and the shadow of her past. Life in prison was starkly different from the chaotic, often volatile existence she had known on the outside. Yet, even behind bars, Mangum remained steadfast in her claim of innocence. From the beginning, she sought ways to challenge her conviction. Mangum filed multiple appeals, arguing that her trial had been unfair. She alleged that her legal representation had been inadequate and that the jury had been influenced by her past notoriety rather than focusing solely on the facts of the case. Her appeals have yet to overturn the verdict, but they have kept her story in the public eye. Supporters have pointed to potential gaps in her defense and questioned whether the justice system had treated her equitably. Critics, however, saw her actions as yet another refusal to take responsibility for her choices. Incarceration has not been without challenges. Reports suggest that Mangum has faced struggles adjusting to life behind bars. Yet, she has also sought to find purpose, participating in prison programs and reflecting on the choices that brought her to this point. The years since her conviction have been marked by reflection and defiance. Mangum's story remains one of controversy and complexity, a life shaped by decisions, consequences, and the relentless pursuit of redemption, even when the odds are stacked against her. For Mangum, the fight is far from over. Whether she will find the justice she seeks or continue to live under the shadow of her conviction remains an open question, one that adds yet another layer to the enduring enigma of her life. Crystal Mangum's story has never been confined to courtroom walls. From the very beginning, the media played a central role in shaping public opinion about her. Whether it was the Duke Lacrosse scandal or her eventual conviction for the murder of Reginald Daye, the press was there capturing, amplifying, and at times distorting the narrative. During the Duke Lacrosse case, media outlets from every corner of the country rushed to cover the shocking allegations. Mangum was quickly cast as the face of systemic injustice, a symbol of racial and gender inequality. Headlines were bold, opinions were sharp, and many rushed to judgment before the facts were fully known. But as the case unraveled, the narrative shifted. Mangum went from being viewed as a victim to being labeled as a liar. Media scrutiny turned relentless, with every detail of her life dissected and analyzed. The same outlets that had once championed her now questioned her credibility, portraying her as an opportunist who had weaponized the truth for personal gain. By the time of her murder trial, Mangum was already infamous. Coverage of her case often carried the baggage of her past, making it nearly impossible for her to escape the shadow of the Duke allegations. For better or worse, the media's portrayal of her first as a victim, then as a villain played a significant role in how the public, and perhaps even the courts, perceived her actions. The media's role in Mangum's story raises questions about fairness, responsibility, and the power of public narrative. Was she a victim of a press eager to sensationalize her life, or did the media simply reflect the consequences of her own choices? The answer may lie somewhere in between. The Duke Lacrosse case remains a defining moment in Crystal Mangum's life. The events of 2006 set the stage for everything that would follow, casting a long shadow over her credibility and public image. At its core, the case exposed deep flaws in the justice system. The rush to prosecute the accused players without concrete evidence highlighted the dangers of succumbing to public pressure. District Attorney Mike Mifong's misconduct, his decision to withhold exculpatory evidence and pursue a case built on shaky ground, became a textbook example of prosecutorial overreach. But the case wasn't just about the law, it was also about society. It forced the nation to confront uncomfortable questions about race, privilege, and power. How did Mangum's identity as a black woman influence the way her claims were received? How did the player's status as wealthy, white athletes shape public perception of their innocence or guilt? For Mangum, the case was both a moment of empowerment and a turning point in her downfall. Her accusations, later proven false, would forever alter her life, shaping how she was viewed by the public and the legal system. Even years later, the specter of the Duke case loomed over her, complicating every aspect of her story. Revisiting this case provides valuable lessons about the dangers of rushing to judgment, the importance of due process, and the lasting impact of false accusations, not just on those accused, but on the accuser as well. For the three Duke Lacrosse players accused of assault, life would never be the same. While they were eventually exonerated, the damage done during the course of the investigation and trial was profound. Publicly branded as predators, the accused players faced harassment, media scrutiny, and ostracization. Their names were splashed across headlines, their faces on every television screen, as the nation dissected their lives and painted them as the embodiment of privilege gone wrong. Even after their exoneration, the stigma lingered. Rebuilding their lives was no easy task. Some struggled with the mental toll of being wrongfully accused, while others faced challenges in their personal and professional lives. Trust was eroded, opportunities were lost, and relationships were strained. The case also had a ripple effect on their families. Parents, siblings, and loved ones of the accused bore the brunt of public judgment, enduring threats and ridicule as they stood by their children. For many, the ordeal left scars that would never fully heal. Yet, the players also became advocates for justice reform, using their experience to highlight flaws in the system. They spoke out about the importance of due process and the consequences of false accusations, channeling their pain into purpose. The Duke Lacrosse case was a turning point for everyone involved. For the accused players, it was a lesson in resilience and the importance of fighting for the truth. But it was also a reminder of how easily lives can be upended by allegations, even when justice ultimately prevails. Crystal Mangum's life behind bars has been anything but quiet. From the moment she was convicted of second-degree murder, she began her fight to challenge the verdict. Her legal journey has been a complicated and often frustrating battle, revealing the complexities of navigating the justice system as someone with a controversial past. Mangum's appeals have centered on several key arguments. She has claimed inadequate legal representation during her trial, alleging that her defense failed to present critical evidence and effectively counter the prosecution's narrative. She also pointed to questions surrounding the handling of evidence, arguing that inconsistencies were overlooked or not properly challenged. Perhaps most contentious is her assertion that her past played an outsized role in the trial. Mangum has argued that the specter of the Duke Lacrosse case unfairly influenced the jury's perception of her character. For her, the trial wasn't just about the events of April 3rd, 2011. It was about her entire life being judged in one courtroom. Despite her efforts, Mangum's appeals have yet to overturn her conviction. Each denial has deepened the divide between those who believe she was wrongfully convicted and those who see her as a dangerous individual unwilling to take responsibility for her actions. Her legal battles have highlighted broader issues within the justice system. How much does a person's past weigh in a jury's decision? Can someone with a history as polarizing as Mangum's truly receive a fair trial? These questions remain open, ensuring that her case continues to spark debate. In the age of social media, Crystal Mangum's story has taken on a life of its own. Platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit have become battlegrounds for debates about her guilt, her past, and the broader societal issues her case represents. Public opinion about Mangum remains deeply divided. For some, she is a symbol of resilience, a woman who has endured trauma and systemic failures, yet refuses to back down. For others, she is a cautionary tale about the dangers of false accusations and unchecked anger. Social media has amplified these debates, often distorting the narrative. Posts and threads dissect every aspect of her life, from her initial accusations in the Duke Lacrosse case to her conviction for Reginald Daye's murder. The court of public opinion has become a space where everyone has a voice, but not necessarily the facts. These conversations reflect broader societal issues. Discussions about race, gender, and justice often emerge in debates about Mangum, highlighting the intersection of these themes in her story. While some argue her race and class unfairly influenced public and legal perceptions, others point to her actions as the root of her struggles. The online discourse ensures that Mangum's story remains a polarizing topic, a flashpoint for larger conversations about accountability, forgiveness, and the complexities of human behavior. To truly understand Crystal Mangum's life, one must look beyond the headlines and legal battles to explore her psychological makeup. What drives someone to make the choices she has made? What underlying factors might explain her tumultuous life? Experts who have studied Mangum's behavior point to a history of trauma and instability. Her early life was marked by hardship, including reports of abuse and struggles with mental health. These experiences likely shaped her worldview and influenced her actions later in life. Mangum's behavior patterns, her impulsivity, volatile relationships, and struggles with self control suggest a complex psychological profile. Some experts believe she may have been dealing with unresolved trauma, leading to cycles of self destructive behavior. Others point to potential personality traits that made her susceptible to conflict and poor decision making under stress. Understanding Mangum's psychology doesn't excuse her actions, but it provides context. It helps explain how a woman who once dreamed of becoming a teacher found herself at the center of two of the most infamous legal cases of the past 2 decades. Her story is a reminder that behind every headline is a human being, a person shaped by experiences, choices, and circumstances. For Mangum, Those forces have created a life of chaos, tragedy, and endless questions about what might have been. Crystal Mangum and Reginald Daye's relationship was far from simple. Beneath the surface of their partnership lay patterns of conflict that many experts recognize as hallmarks of domestic violence. Their volatile dynamic brought into sharp focus the challenges faced by individuals caught in cycles of abuse and dysfunction. Domestic violence is rarely black and white, and this case was no exception. Mangum claimed she was a victim, forced to defend herself during a moment of extreme fear. Yet, Day's family and friends painted a different picture of him as a kind and caring man. Was the truth somewhere in between? One thing is certain: society often struggles to recognize and address domestic violence before it escalates to tragedy. Neighbors and friends may see warning signs, frequent arguments, visible injuries, or emotional distress, but feel powerless to intervene. The stigma surrounding abusive relationships often silences victims, leaving their cries for help unheard until it's too late. Mangum's case underscores these complexities. Whether she was a victim or an aggressor, or both at different times, her story highlights how difficult it is to untangle the dynamics of domestic violence. It also raises questions about how society and the legal system can better protect individuals in such situations while ensuring justice for all parties involved. The cases involving Crystal Mangum have tested the legal system's ability to navigate murky waters. From the Duke Lacrosse case to her trial for the murder of Reginald Daye, Mangum's legal battles have presented challenges that go beyond the usual courtroom drama. Her claims of assault in 26 forced the system to grapple with the delicate balance between believing victims and ensuring due process. The rush to prosecute the Duke players, driven in part by public outcry and media pressure, exposed the dangers of making decisions before all the evidence is in. Fast forward to 2013, and Mangum was once again at the mercy of the legal system, this time as a defendant claiming self defense. Her trial raised questions about how past actions should influence current proceedings. Was it fair for her history to weigh so heavily on the jury's decision? Or was it inevitable, given the high profile nature of her previous accusations? These cases reveal the cracks in a system that is often ill equipped to handle complex narratives. They highlight the importance of thorough investigations, impartial decision making, and ensuring that every voice, victim or accused, is heard. The lessons from Mangum's legal journey are clear. Justice requires patience, integrity, and a commitment to uncovering the truth, no matter how complicated it may be. Crystal Mangum's story is one that cannot be separated from the broader context of race and gender. Both factors have played a central role in shaping public perception of her actions and the outcomes of her legal battles. As a black woman accusing white men in the Duke Lacrosse case, Mangum became a lightning rod for debates about racial and gender dynamics. Supporters saw her as a symbol of the systemic oppression faced by women of color, while critics accused her of weaponizing her identity to fabricate a claim. Years later, these dynamics were still at play during her murder trial. Did her identity as a black woman facing accusations of violence influence how she was perceived by the jury? Did stereotypes about race and gender unfairly sway public opinion? Mangum's story reflects the biases that persist in society and the justice system. Research shows that black women are often disbelieved or dismissed when they come forward as victims, while being judged more harshly as defendants. These biases can shape everything from the resources available to them to the outcomes of their trials. By examining how race and gender intersected in Mangum's life, we gain insight into the broader systemic issues that affect countless others. Her story forces us to ask hard questions about justice, fairness, and the ways in which identity shapes our perceptions of truth. At the heart of this tangled story are two families, those of Crystal Mangum and Reginald Daye, left to grapple with the aftermath of tragedy. While the courts debated evidence and the media dissected every detail, these families bore the emotional weight of loss, anger, and unanswered questions. For Day's family, the pain of his death is a wound that has yet to heal. They describe him as a kind, generous man who opened his home and heart to Mangum, only to have his life end in violence. His relatives have struggled to reconcile the person they knew with the man portrayed in court. For them, Mangum's conviction brought some sense of closure, but no verdict could ever fill the void left by Day's absence. Mangum's family, meanwhile, has faced their own turmoil. Supporters within her circle believe she was unfairly vilified by the public and the justice system. They argue that her past played too great a role in the trial and that her claims of self defense were not given enough weight. Others, however, have distanced themselves, citing concerns about her actions and decisions over the years. These families' stories remind us of the human cost of such tragedies. Behind every headline and legal ruling are lives forever changed, relationships fractured, and grief that lingers long after the courtrooms empty. Crystal Mangum's life is a tapestry of complexities, filled with choices, consequences, and the rippling effects of a justice system under strain. Reflecting on her story offers important lessons, not just for the courts, but for society as a whole. The Duke Lacrosse case serves as a reminder of the dangers of rushing to judgment and the devastating consequences of false accusations. At the same time, it highlights the systemic issues that lead some to feel they have no choice but to speak out, regardless of the truth. Her murder trial raises questions about how much weight a person's past should carry in determining their future. Is it possible for someone with a polarizing history to receive a truly fair trial, or will public opinion always cast a shadow? The role of the media is another critical takeaway. Mangum's story has been shaped as much by the press as by the facts, with narratives spun to fit societal debates about race, gender, and justice. This case underscores the need for responsible reporting and critical consumption of information. Ultimately, Mangum's story challenges us to think deeply about justice, redemption, and the ways in which our actions and those of others shape our lives. As of November 2024, Crystal Mangum remains incarcerated, serving her sentence for the murder of Reginald Daye. Her appeals have yet to succeed, but she continues to fight, insisting on her innocence and challenging the system she believes has failed her. The individuals involved in her past cases, from the Duke lacrosse players to those who testified in her murder trial, have moved forward, each carrying the weight of their experiences. Some have rebuilt their lives, while others still wrestle with the scars left by these events. For all who followed her story, Crystal Mangum represents a cautionary tale, a life shaped by choices, circumstances, and the far reaching consequences of truth and lies. Her story is a reminder of the complexities of the human experience and the delicate balance between justice and redemption. What do you think about the case of Crystal Mangum? Do you believe the justice system handled it fairly, or do you see deeper layers to her story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more gripping true crime stories like this one. Join us next time as we uncover the mysteries and truths behind some of the world's most haunting cases. See you then.